You are holding a muffin. It cost $4. You picked it up yourself from a glass case 3 feet from the register. No one carried anything. No one served anything. The entire transaction lasted 11 seconds. And then the screen turns around. 20%, 25%, 30%. 3 glowing buttons arranged like a test you didn't study for. Below them, in smaller letters, almost apologetic, no tip. The cashier is watching. The person behind you is watching. The screen itself seems to be watching. And in that moment, that strange, suspended moment, something happens inside your brain that has almost nothing to do with money. Most people think tipping is about generosity, a small reward for good service, a choice. That is not what is happening on that screen. What is happening on that screen is one of the most sophisticated psychological pressure systems ever deployed against ordinary people. And it was designed, tested, and optimized to make sure you press the button you don't want to press. This is the story of how a gesture of gratitude became a machine. To understand what changed, you have to understand what tipping used to be. For most of the 20th century, tipping in America lived inside a narrow territory. Restaurants with table service, bartenders, taxi drivers, hotel porters. A bounded world with unwritten rules everyone roughly understood. 15% for adequate, 20% for excellent. Cash, folded, left on a table. The transaction was private. The decision was yours. And critically, no one watched you make it. Then, around 2013, something small happened. Something that seemed harmless. Payment terminals turned around. Companies like Square began replacing cash registers with sleek tablets, and those tablets came with a default feature, a tip screen presented to the customer in front of the employee before the receipt printed. It seemed like a convenience, a digital version of the tip jar. It was not. Because the engineers who built these screens understood something that tip jars never could exploit: the difference between a private decision and a public one. A tip jar asks a question. A tip screen stages a confrontation. In behavioral economics, there is a concept called the default effect. Humans overwhelmingly accept whatever option requires the least resistance. Organ donation rates in countries where you must opt out hover near 90%. In countries where you must opt in, they collapse to 15%. The people who designed tip screens knew this, so they made the suggested amounts the buttons. Large, colorful, centered. And they made no tip something else entirely. Smaller, grayer, lower on the screen. In some systems, declining requires an extra tap. A custom amount requires typing. Pressing 20% takes one motion. Refusing takes a small act of defiance. But the defaults were only the first layer. The second layer was the audience. In 2019, researchers studying digital payment systems noticed something strange in the data. When customers were watched during the tip decision, by the employee, by other customers in line, tipping rates rose dramatically. Not because service improved, not because gratitude increased, because shame is a faster motivator than generosity. The screen flips toward you. The employee's eyes are right there. A line of strangers forms behind your shoulders. You have roughly 4 seconds. This is not a request. It is an ambush with buttons. And here is the detail most people never consider. The employee standing in front of you didn't choose this either. They are watching you decide, in real time, whether their rent gets paid. 2 people, locked in a moment of manufactured awkwardness, both of them serving a system neither of them built. Then the territory began to expand. The screens left the restaurants. They appeared at bakery counters where you grab your own bread, at self-service kiosks where no human is present at all, at drive-through windows, at stadium beer stands, at airport vending machines, self-checkout machines, machines where you scan the items, you bag the groceries, you perform the labor, began asking for tips. A tip. For a machine. For your own work. By 2023, the phenomenon had a name. Researchers and journalists started calling it tip creep, the slow, ratcheting expansion of tipping into places it had never existed. And alongside it, a second term emerged, describing what was happening inside the customers: tip fatigue. Surveys began capturing the exhaustion. Roughly 2/3 of Americans reported holding a negative view of tipping itself. The thing they were doing, voluntarily, multiple times a day. People described feeling manipulated, cornered, resentful of the worker in front of them, and then guilty about the resentment. The suggested percentages climbed too. 15 became 18. 18 became 20. Screens began opening at 25, 30, even 35% for transactions where the only service rendered was the rotation of a tablet. And underneath the irritation, a darker question started to surface. If everyone hates this, customers, workers, even many business owners, why does it keep growing? The answer requires looking at who actually benefits, and it is not the person handing you the muffin. Here's the part of the story where the screen stops being the villain. Because the screen is only a tool. The real architecture is older and far more deliberate. In the United States, federal law allows employers to pay tipped workers a sub-minimum wage, in many states as low as $2.13 per hour, a number that has not changed since 1991. The law assumes tips will fill the gap between that figure and a living wage. Read that mechanism carefully, because hidden inside it is a quiet transfer. The employer's obligation to pay their own worker, the most basic obligation in all of commerce, is moved off the company's books and onto yours. The wage becomes voluntary, crowdsourced, paid in 4-second increments by strangers under social pressure at a glowing screen. The business sets the price of the muffin. The business sets the wage. And the business installs the screen that asks you to make up the difference between them. Economists have a phrase for shifting your costs onto someone else: externalizing. What the modern tipping system externalizes is the payroll itself. And the genius of the design, the truly remarkable part, is where it points your frustration. When the screen demands 30% for a bottle of water, you do not get angry at the franchise owner. You do not get angry at the payment processor collecting a percentage of every inflated transaction. You get irritated at the 19-year-old behind the counter. Or you swallow the irritation, pay, and feel vaguely cheated by no one in particular. The system has no face. That is not an accident. That is the design. Meanwhile, the worker absorbs the other side of the same machine: income that swings unpredictably week to week, dependence on the moods of strangers, and studies showing that tip amounts correlate with the customer's bias, race, gender, appearance, far more than with the quality of anyone's work. Two parties, pitted against each other at the counter, and a third party, absent from the room, collecting the margin. There is one more layer, the deepest one. Every time you press that button under pressure, something else is being purchased, something that never appears on the receipt. The transaction trains you. It normalizes the idea that prices are not prices, that the number on the menu is an opening bid, that moral responsibility for another person's livelihood can be installed into an 11-second interaction and handed to whoever happens to be standing there. Slowly, the question shifts. It is no longer, was this service worth rewarding? It becomes, what kind of person am I in front of these witnesses right now? That is no longer a financial decision. That is an identity test, administered dozens of times a week by software. And tests like that have a cost that compounds. Researchers tracking consumer sentiment have watched generosity itself begin to erode. People tipping less, resenting more, withdrawing from the social contract the system pretends to celebrate. The mechanism designed to extract goodwill is, slowly, burning through the supply. A gratuity was once the warmest object in commerce. A small human signal passed between two people. I saw you. Thank you. Look at what it has become. A percentage, calculated by a corporation, displayed by an algorithm, extracted through surveillance and shame, to pay a debt that was never yours. So the next time the screen turns toward you, look at it for a moment longer than feels comfortable. Notice the size of the buttons. Notice which option is easiest. Notice who is watching, and notice who isn't. The owner, the processor, the architecture, all of it invisible, all of it patient. The screen will wait. It is very good at waiting. It is not asking whether you are generous. It is asking whether you've noticed who stopped paying, and how quietly the bill was slid across the counter to you. Most people press the button. The line moves forward. And somewhere, in a spreadsheet no customer will ever see, a wage that should have existed continues, politely, not to. I loved it down